The auction block was no place for a young woman, but Clara Whitmore had learned that fate cared little for what was right or decent. She stood there in the scorching Texas sun, her hands bound, her wedding dress torn and filthy from 3 days of travel in a wagon. The dress had been meant for a different life, a different man, before her father's debts had consumed everything she thought was hers. The auctioneer's voice droned on, listing her as though she were livestock. Mail-order bride, he called her, though the truth was far uglier. Her father had sold her contract to pay his gambling debts, and now strange men circled below, evaluating her worth with cold, calculating eyes. She tried to stand tall, to maintain some shred of dignity, but inside she was shattering. 19 years old, and being sold, like property in 1882, in a country that had supposedly abolished such things. The bidding started at $20. A rancher with tobacco-stained teeth called out $25. A merchant in a fine suit countered with $30. Clara closed her eyes, trying to disappear inside herself, to go somewhere far away where this wasn't happening. Then a voice cut through the crowd, quiet but firm, stopping everyone in their tracks. $3. The crowd erupted in laughter. The auctioneer sputtered, insulted by such a ridiculous offer. Clara's eyes snapped open, searching for the man who had just humiliated her further. She found him at the back of the crowd, a cowboy in worn leather and a hat that had seen better days. He was young, perhaps 25, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that held something she couldn't quite name. He didn't look wealthy. He didn't look like much of anything, really. The auctioneer waved him off dismissively, ready to continue with serious bidders. But the cowboy stepped forward, his hand raised. $3 was all he had in this world, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. And if there was any justice left in this godforsaken territory, a woman's freedom shouldn't cost more than an honest man could afford. His words rang out like a challenge, and suddenly the crowd wasn't laughing anymore. The wealthy bidders shifted uncomfortably. To outbid him now would be to admit they were purchasing a human being, not fulfilling some charitable marriage contract. The silence stretched unbearably. The auctioneer looked furious, but the law was the law. He had to accept the highest bid, even if it was an insult to his commission. With a sharp crack of his gavel, he declared the cowboy the winner. Clara felt her knees weaken as the cowboy approached the platform. Up close, she could see the kindness in his weather-worn face, the gentle way he moved despite his rough appearance. He paid his $3, every cent falling onto the auctioneer's table with a clink that sounded like both an ending and a beginning. Then he turned to Clara and carefully, respectfully, began untying her bonds. His hands were calloused but gentle. "I'm sorry," he whispered so only she could hear. "I know this ain't right, none of it, but I couldn't let those men take you." His voice cracked with emotion, and Clara realized with shock that his eyes were wet with tears. When her hands were free, she rubbed her raw wrists, unable to speak, unable to process what was happening. The cowboy stepped back and removed his hat, holding it against his chest. Then, to her absolute astonishment, he lowered himself to one knee right there, on the dusty auction platform in front of the entire town. Clara screamed, the sound tearing from her throat unbidden. Not from fear, but from the sheer impossible kindness of what she was witnessing. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice steady despite the tears now streaming freely down his face. "My name is James Cooper. I ain't rich, and I ain't got much to offer except a small homestead and an honest heart. But I want you to know that you're free. That contract I just bought, I'm tearing it up right here and now." He pulled the paper from his pocket and ripped it in half, letting the pieces fall to the ground. "You don't owe me nothing, not marriage, not service, nothing at all. But if you'd be willing, I'd be honored to offer you a place to stay, no strings attached, until you figure out where you want to go and what you want to do with your life." Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Men didn't do this. Men didn't spend their last $3 to free a stranger and then offer them unconditional sanctuary. It went against everything she had learned about the world, about survival, about the cruelty that humans were capable of inflicting on each other. "Why?" she finally managed to whisper. "Why would you do this?" James stood, placing his hat back on his head. "Because my mother was sold when I was a boy," he said quietly. "I never saw her again, and I swore if I ever had the chance to save someone from that fate, I would, even if it cost me everything." He held out his hand, not demanding, simply offering. "So, what do you say, Miss Whitmore? Would you accept the help of a poor cowboy who believes you deserve better than this?" Clara looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and honest and trembling slightly. She thought of her father, who had valued cards more than his daughter. She thought of the men who had bid on her like she was cattle. And she thought of this stranger who had given everything he had to set her free, expecting nothing in return. She placed her hand in his, and for the first time in 3 days, she smiled. "I accept, Mr. Cooper, and thank you." The words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he had done, but they were all she had. As they walked away from that auction block together, Clara realized that sometimes redemption comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it comes from a cowboy with $3 and a heart full of remembered pain, who chose kindness when cruelty would have been easier. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, it was hers to decide.